I was always encouraged to make things. I was always outside looking at natural things and materials. I think I'm a kind of product of my beginnings to some extent. I do think early influences of feeling that creative stuff is encouraged and celebrated in my family, I think that kind of helped me get going.
Welcome back to Artfully Crafted. My name is Alienor, and each week I travel to a craft person's studio, interview them and show you their work. This week we're going to Brixton to meet Bridget Bailey. Bridget trained as a weaver, then became a milliner and now works as a textile artist. In 2023 she took part in Collect, a craft fair that takes place at Somerset House and is run by the Crafts Council. Her immersive installation there was inspired by the plants and insects that she encounters on her allotment. Hi Bridget, thank you so much for having me. We're here in your studio at Clockwork Studios and we're here to talk about your work. We've got some examples in front of us. Would you like to start? We had a conversation off camera where you said that you always, you don't want to be categorised and you find it quite an interesting thing to talk about what you do. So do you want to maybe start there?
I have been making for more than 40 years. Okay. So in all that time, I've kind of gone through various stages of textile and hat making and millinery, and I feel like each stage that I've gone through has really added its colours and influences into the mix. So I kind of think of my making process and materials like a sort of creative compost that's built up over the years that I can dip into and fish out some sort of millinery textile hybrid of a way of working.
I like that, the creative compost. I think that's it's a nice way of thinking about it. Is that part of your practice, kind of finding materials? I mean, what processes do you use at the moment?
So there's a whole kind of language of textiles with fibres and silks, dyeing things. I used to do weaving, but now I fray things. I'm kind of calling that unweaving, but it's still, I think you never get over those material experiences of studying something. So there's the textile language, there's millinery, which is, again, you might use straw, you might do blocking and shaping and forming things. There's a real lightness of touch with millinery, and I think the air and space between things is very important. So the richness of textiles and the lightness, airiness of millinery, I think they're all in the creative compost and come out in the work I do now.
Do you want to talk about how you came to making in the first place? Is that something that you always have done?
I come from quite a creative family where my mum was a painter and my sister's a potter. So I think that possibility of art and making was always there. I was always encouraged to make things. I was always outside looking at natural things and materials. I think I'm a kind of product of my beginnings to some extent. And I do think early influences of feeling that creative stuff is encouraged and celebrated in my family, I think that kind of helped me get going.
Yes, I can imagine. I think it's not often that people are encouraged to sort of follow their passion and to just follow their intuition, I guess.
I think it was more a sort of not steering and pushing, which is quite a wonderful thing, actually, quite a lucky thing, if you're allowed to kind of grow into the shape you've got to grow into. There must have been some sort of ethics and ethos going on there, or just good, healthy neglect, maybe. I think that's quite an important thing, actually.
Healthy neglect. I've never thought about it that way.
It's the opposite of micromanaging, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and perhaps something that we've lost a little bit. Now we get sort of helicopter parents, but actually sort of letting your kids kind of develop their own interests and being drawn to whatever they're drawn to and pursuing that is quite a lovely thing, isn't it?
I think even a short patch of that in your life, it's something that you can remember the feeling of it. I think that's important.
That feeling of freedom.
Yeah.
So having had that childhood of exploration and curiosity and being allowed to relish in that, what was your path, when you left school?
I was quite creative at school. I kind of enjoyed all sorts of things, but it's interesting. I think my mum being a painter and my sister being a potter actually made me think, I can't be doing what they're doing. I want my own thing. And I discovered textiles on foundation. I didn't know it was a thing before that, which is funny in a way because we all wear clothes, we all feel materials against our skin, don't we? But it was only on foundation that I realised it was a thing that you could do in some way.
Right.
So I went to Farnham and I studied in a really hands-on way, spinning, weaving, printing, all the kind of special things that fibres and materials can do. Mm-hmm.
That sounds amazing. And so what sort of things were you making?
That course, it was textiles rather than fashion. Mm-hmm. So it encouraged dyeing things. I specialised in pleating, which was quite 3D, but not as conceptually 3D as weaving. Mm-hmm. But I think having had a brush with weaving and spinning, you sort of never get over what you know. So feeling the textures, I think I've got a sort of textile filter on how I look at nature. If I'm looking at a bird's nest, I'll think, velvety moss or scratchy twig. It's always in there, isn't it?
So it's given you a sort of lens through which to look at the world.
Yes, it has. I don't know whether fine artists have a fine art lens. I expect they do.
Yeah, I guess everyone has a sort of core skill that feeds into their practice
or a first love.
A first love, yes. It could be, it could be drawing or maybe it's, with clay. But I do think there's a sort of, the first love, something that leaves a mark. You also trained as a milliner, is that right?
I sort of grew into that in quite a sudden way of taking my pleated fabrics to show that, she's quite a famous designer, but a long time ago, Jean Muir. Mm-hmm. I took my pleated fabrics to show her and she said, make me some hats. So absolutely in at the deep end, making sculptural, I suppose you call them fascinators now, but that wasn't a species then, making these sculptural pieces to go with her collection. I did that as a freelancer for 5 years and sort of learnt various hat-making skills or hat-making engineering of how something stays on a head, looking very light and airy. I studied with a woman called Rose Corey, who was quite a special freelance millinery teacher, and kind of learnt as I went doing that.
Yeah, so already you're sort of branching out and diversifying. And, well, I guess we're talking about versatility, right, in your approach.
And panicky adaptability.
Panicky in what way?
Well, you're sort of in at the deep end, wondering how to do something within the frame of a commission. And I think it's terrifying, but it's brilliant as well.
Yeah, it sort of fuels you, I guess.
Yes, it does. But I think I've always felt, back to the creative compost, that sort of shows you, felt like I was a very textile influenced hat maker. You can't say millinery is more like the sort of black belt when you've done the hat making for a while, maybe. You've got to be a little bit more skilled to even feel. I still struggle to say that word, even though, it feels a bit more grand when I didn't have a official training in many ways.
Right. Do you think that's a bit of imposter syndrome in some ways?
Well, I think you just get over that as you realise you've been making and supporting yourself somehow or other for 40 years. You have to not never taking myself seriously, but you have to kind of respect that you've managed it for so long, don't you?
Yeah. And so you said you were freelance for 5 years. Is that when you established when you started,
I've always been freelance, but it's just the working with Jean Muir as a freelancer, not on her books or anything, but developing this way of working with her, that was quite an education. And I think these relationships, you get together with a designer, you have a wonderful waltz, it might be 2 years, it might be 5, and then they move on and you sort of have to regroup and find other people to work with. There's a sort of cycle to things, isn't there, which I didn't know then. I see it a bit more clearly now.
Yes, I guess that must be disorientating when you think, oh, I found a niche, I found a way to make a living from what I love, and then that moment
it's always
passes.
Changing. It is.
Yeah. And what did you do then when those 5 years came to an end?
So I formed a partnership with a lovely friend who became my business partner, Anne Tomlin, and we had about 20 years together of a much more commercial way of hat making, where we got our bases blocked in Luton, but we made our own trims, and we had a couple of full-time staff. And
so much more business-minded.
Well, still tiny, but big for tiny.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
So millinery and textiles, you talked about dyeing, and I see there's some dyeing behind me as well. So how did you get, you had that 20-year partnership, and what has taken you to where you are now?
I think that sort of, it's a funny way to describe it, but we made quite big hats that might have a lot of fabric on them, but to be unique in that very competitive field, to be able to dye something to make a unique colour or a unique trim that could make you stand out or offer different companies exclusivity without a bit of a clash of them having the same thing. All those jugglings, they're very good training for toughening you up, and very repetitive making sometimes to get a big order done. That gives you a sort of fitness that I think you never get over these things. So that more commercial way of working is in my compost bin now, although I might be doing 1,000 practices to make one really special thing instead of repeating something 1,000 times. I think making fitness, it's all part of that, I think. But that wonderful 20 years of being more of a designer and showing at Fashion Week and selling to really great stores, but massively time consuming and a huge effort, but really being out there in that more commercial way, that all sort of slumped in the 2000s to do with it's always a combination of things, department stores franchising and manufacturing, moving out to China, and the same price points here. It's like the tide going out and leaving the normal price point beached up the beach. It just didn't work anymore. And that's when I really had to think, how can I make my work look worthwhile for being a one-woman band manufacturing in this country? And I really started on a more special journey then with millinery at first, and trying to be more refined and more unique.
Bespoke and sort of one-off pieces.
Wearable art. These words get so dated, don't they? But that sort of trying to think in a more one-off way, in a more unique way, it's been a struggle to even think of myself more as an artist. It's been quite a sort of probably a 10-year evolution that I could say it a bit better now.
And I can see how that, that desire to not be categorised that you mentioned that's kind of informed that, right? You kind of want to be free of labels, and you want the focus to be on the making and the sort of feelings and the things that you notice about the world. And
I think that taking the hat out of millinery and taking the material to wear or something out of textile and just leaving these materials and techniques, I think it presented these things in a very fresh way to people that I find that quite addictive, to be honest, because to be able to point to some little whiskery swirl of a nest and someone thinks, what the hell is that? What's it made of? It's a rather slow, not that exciting conjuring trick, if you think of it in that way, which gets people's attention.
Yeah.
And then you have that moment to talk about something interesting or share something.
A moment of connection.
Yes. And having that audience between you with, or your work could make that for people between each other. I think that's quite a special thing.
And so who are your clients and the people you collaborate with now? Do you make things and, make things that you want to make and sell them, or do you work to commission? I mean, where are you at now with your practice?
A little bit of everything. I don't know if other people are the same, but it takes every possibility to keep a self-employed show on the road, I find. So I'm always trying to make tempting, intriguing things. They have to intrigue me, and then it's fun to show them to people. So there's always that thread going on. And then within that, there might be a private client commission, but there also are starting to be some bigger things that are really exciting, where you might work with a national park to make some work about conservation. I've done a couple of projects like that have really made me think there is a voice for materials. That's an exciting thought compared to, it's not I don't totally respect and admire drawing and painting, but materials have got their own things to say. So some installation that's about birds' nests made with textiles, I feel like I'm so much closer to what birds are doing by tussling with what fibres do. And then maybe you see nature in a different way, because you see all the funny old grasses and dry twigs and dead leaves and bits of fluff they might use as materials instead of mess. I think that's quite an exciting way to engage with nature. And that's what happened with this project. The project up in North York Moors National Park was called Birds on the Edge.
Okay.
And it was all about endangered birds and their environments, and 9 artists, I was one of 9 artists asked to make work about it, and I just chose the idea of a nest. What could be a stronger link between what birds do and the actual landscape they live in, because they use what's around them. I just found that a really inspiring marriage of all those things.
Yeah, that's a really inspiring project. How long were you working on that project for?
So I had probably about 6 months altogether to work on that, not necessarily just to make the work, but just to kind of plan what I do. And we had a wonderful study day where we walked with ornithologists. It was a freezing day in April, and it rained and snowed and hailed all in the same day, which was pretty awful because I could hardly face getting my mobile phone out to take a few snaps. But it just made me think.
It probably left a lasting impression.
What the birds are coping with, whereas another study day I went on in May was so dreamy and wonderful. It was almost too nice to be real, So to walk with ornithologists and ask a few questions about migration and how things work and what birds might use to build their nest and what they might eat, it was really intense, wonderful experience. And to have that meeting in the landscape first, even though you don't make everything new, because you sort of slide to being a bit naive if you don't cling to your own making sophistication, but something new gets in the mix with that sort of collaboration that freshens it up and connects it better with.
You need the externalities to kind of push in.
And I think of it as a sort of funny, you could call it collaboration. I always think of it like sort of cross-pollinating. If you collaborate with someone, if we think about ourselves like musical instruments, I've probably got quite a narrow range of 2 octaves, and then I go a bit squeaky or you can't hear me. But if you grab somebody else, you suddenly share their range. So I felt with these naturalists and ecologists, we could really reach a much broader range about how something works. It's such an exciting discovery about what collaboration and what humans really do with sharing knowledge. It was, it's something that you can say, but I really felt I experienced that in an exciting way in that project.
And you talk about, humans sharing knowledge and cross-pollination. You're a member of the Art Workers Guild, that's how we know each other. you're also a member of the British Hats Guild and also Design Nation. What are these networks brought to your practice, to your experience as a maker?
I think it's so helpful to be with like-minded people that also have difference, that have a mix of levels of experience. And I think with the Hat Guild, hat making is a very diverse field, and I think hat really undersells it in a way, because you tend to bump into that thing with people of hat, I don't need a hat, I can't quite cope with them, I'm a bit scared, which somehow gets in the way of the sculpture. It's a kind of sculpture with materials. So it's a very diverse field, and I'm really on the edge of it because I'm not making hats, but I am using the language of hat making. So it's wonderful to be part of that, like an extreme on the edge of hat making. But then at the Art Workers Guild, there's a mass of different people who, many of whom have really climbed somewhere quite rare and specialised in their fields, and they all have quite a similar experience to me of having a big background in various sorts of making, but all very different.
Yeah, ever evolving, and I guess
and you can see a lot of life examples.
And that constant sort of self-exploration and pushing yourself to the next evolution, I guess.
And wonderful, skilled people who have a lot of experience of commission or being artists in residence, or all the things that one dreams about being. You know, there's lots of those in there. And then Design Nation, it's a group of not necessarily young in age, but maybe young in what they're doing as business people, and all people who really care about what they're doing and want to better themselves and collaborate and share things. They offer wonderful education opportunities, like little courses about public speaking, or sharing exhibitions together, or tiny courses in filmmaking about your work. And to kind of be doing those things and meeting people doing them, it's just a wonderful way to grow and learn with like-minded people who are sort of all quite different in their skills, but it's quite a kind of dynamic, encouraging, supportive family to be part of.
Yeah.
And I think those different groups are sort of
complement each other quite well.
Like it's the creative family, aren't they, really?
Yeah. Yeah, so the Design Nation then, is it kind of, is there also a sort of practical side in a way of sort of running, not running a business, but, you know, having to run your own practice, every element of it? Is that kind of part of what they try to bring to the table?
They offer all sorts of things like that. And I think people, the wonderful thing about these groups is people help each other, don't they?
Yeah.
Like if you have a WhatsApp group about an exhibition, that sort of mops up loads of panicking. Sometimes the WhatsApp groups are like pounds of milk boiling over. They're sort of frothing at the mouth, aren't they, with panic? But people sort of sort themselves out on them and help each other out. It's something being part of these groups has really helped me see how organisations work in that way and what helps them. But yes, they talk about everything, and you make friends in that way, and they offer group exhibition opportunities, so you're not bearing the whole cost yourself. It's a really great thing to be part of, I think.
And I think that feeds into your philosophy as a maker as well, because you teach as well, right? So it's very important for you to keep that dialogue, as you say, across different specialties, but also different generations of makers, right? Do you want to say a little bit about your teaching practice as well?
I've learned so much from teaching. I've sort of mostly done it often one-to-one or groups. I've done the odd bit of teaching in college, but I think people's interest in seeing my textiles and millinery in these sort of art forms completely out of context. I think teaching, at first it was a way to use that interest in a really positive way, where you share a skill. But I've actually found, doing it for quite a few years now, I found being able to explain things to people. You know, what the hell am I doing that makes it come out the way it does? You know, why does that little squidge with my hand make an edge roll up? You know, some of the things are very unvisual. They're like trying to learn to whistle, or a bit more like throwing a pot than plonking a note on the piano. But I've just learnt so much putting skills, physical skills into words. It's made me do my work better, because
so
instead of just humming along, I've had to find the words. And I think it's actually made me more interested in language of making and in language of speaking, and sort of brought the two things together for me in quite an interesting way that's been helpful. And also, when you teach someone, you're sort of side by side with them in a very companionable way. Whereas, I'm not saying I don't have the most wonderful clients and opportunities, but you're a bit more sort of opposite each other. You know, it's funny saying where lovers are opposite each other, but friends are side by side. And in a funny sort of way, there's something there about the different place you stand with teaching people. And I think mentoring is a really lovely word. And although I call it teaching, I think often mentoring, or any sort of degree between the two things, is part of what goes on with that.
But so all of that has really actually informed your own practice. It's not just you giving, it's also you receiving, and it's informed the way you talk about your work and communicate about it. And that communication, it almost sounds like it's become part of the work, right?
It's definitely grown out of teaching, and I think it's helped me with projects in North York Moors National Park, for example. I think the sort of power of sharing materials with people, whether they're an absolute novice or whether they're someone who has massive experience, I think everyone has something to gain by touching materials, noticing that language. It's quite a universal language. That something I've become really interested in is this voice of materials, and I'm still really discovering what that means.
When I was last in your studio, it was with the Creative Connections participants. So the Art Workers Guild has this amazing program supporting early careers craftspeople, and a lot of the questions that were coming up were, you know, they're all at the stage of their life where they've probably finished their formal training and they're in that transition period of setting up their own practice. And I loved that you were giving a lot of advice where you weren't sugarcoating it. You know, you were really sort of being quite open about your own journey and what that's looked like. You know, the sort of, maybe we can talk about the tension between the time as a maker and you know, the other things that come with having to find commissions, and as you say, that relationship with your client or your lover. Do you want to maybe say a little bit about that?
I mean, I think being self-employed is just such an enormous thing, whatever you do. But I think what's funny as a maker is I started making because I love making and materials, and there are so many other layers. And I think I do have this wish to be seen and heard and to have some sort of presence in the world. And if you want to do that, you have to write about yourself, you have to photograph about yourself, you have to be really clear about your thoughts, and you have to talk them, write them, sometimes film them. They're all very different languages, as well as bloody making them. So it is a massive thing. And I think I've had times in my life where I've felt a bit beleaguered and a bit fed up and a bit resentful. And for some reason at the moment, although it's absolutely exhausting, I'm feeling a bit more excited about it. You know, writing applications and feeling that to write with all that elegance and care of choosing the right word and thinking of writing and finding the right word to describe something where you've got, like on Grantium, for example, the Arts Council thing, you've got to be very specific about the word count. So really you're kind of colour matching your thoughts with words and having to be really clear but really refined. I used to so resent it, but I've actually found myself being absolutely exhausted but a lot more interested.
Well, I think it's because you were talking about communication and words becoming part of your practice in a way. So it's, yeah, I guess it's sort of been enveloped into it perhaps, and maybe you find more purpose in it, would you say, than you used to?
I think I think I do, and I think I've managed to getting a bit of outside help, you know, whether it's getting someone to read the application or getting a mentor, paying them a bit of money just to really kick you up the bum to dig your thoughts out, because writing these proposals for things is like a horrible sort of archaeology for me, where I'm sort of scrabbling the mud away to find the skeleton of the idea underneath. I don't know what everybody's like, but I have to scrabble away to find something with a mass of stuff, and other people seem to build up from bullet points, or do they? I have to excavate and practice, and I think these voices in the world, if you do want to have a presence, you really have to embrace it. But I'm not knocking someone who really wants to get away from all that stuff. You know, I would never put one aspect of making and the benefits it has above another. But this is the place where I am at the moment, that I do want a platform to get these ideas out there, to see them for myself as well as sharing them. And writing and managing the money, you know, you have to just about hold it all together to be able to do that, don't you? And it is hard.
And I mean, do you find it hard now?
Of course.
Yeah.
But I think I feel, I don't know, maybe it's not a second wind, it's probably an eighth wind. I don't know, how many winds can you have in your life? Lots, I hope.
Yeah, lots. I think we all kind of, well, it's a little bit like what you were talking about earlier. You had that first collaboration, and then maybe they go away, and, you know, that person then finds someone else to collaborate with, and that might have been a first wind. And then, but it's kind of, I guess, they're cycles, right? And we all go through these cycles.
And there are seasons of sort of making, just like there are 24 hours or years, or very much, you know, they're not all the same length, but there are.
Have you ever been stuck where you couldn't make?
I've been terrified that would happen, always.
Yeah.
You know, and it's funny to bring relationships into these things, but if you think about the beginnings of love affairs that you've had, they're wonderful. And if you just look back at all the endings, that's a bit sad, isn't it? And you can look at all these phases in business as just the same way. But you do, unfortunately, learn so much from the really difficult times. It's such a bugger. But I mean, of course you need to have good and bad, but I've toughened up from some of the really hard times. And, you know, when the big, successful manufacturing hat stage went wrong, I really felt a sort of loss of ego, a sort of loss of status in the world, such a horrible time. But these artistic beginnings, I think, are much more who I am in a way, much more honest about the sort of person I am. They couldn't have grown without that stuff tumbling down. And I think what it sort of showed me was, I really want to be making things and finding these discoveries and sharing that language, because goodness knows, I hope I'd have the guts to have done something else if I didn't, you know. It sort of tests you, and I think those things are important.
And so what are lessons from previous iterations or cycles of your work that have brought you where you are now?
I think it's a funny sort of combination of being really true to what you love about things, and I think the world has gone a bit that way too, but I think I can't sell something that I don't feel really passionate and sincere about. I'm sure other people can, and they're creative with different areas, but for me, I've really got to be excited about what the whisker on the end of something is doing, or what the angle is, or what the colour is. I've really got to be excited about that. So being really true to yourself, but at the same time really sort of responding to where the interest is.
Something that you and I wanted to talk about was crafts and the way that it's talked about and the perception of it, and maybe how that might affect its future.
I always have this thing where I think I like the word craftsmanship better than craft, because it's sort of just, in fact, I actually love the word making. I think what's quite difficult is, don't you think words have what you feel they mean, but then they also have that unconscious bias. And I think words get tired. So I think before I could even start to really talk about craft, I would have to clarify what it means for me. And what it means for me is understanding the language of materials, how they behave in your hands and what they will do and what they won't do. And craftsmanship is using that in the way you want it to be. And I think it's really important to say that clearly and understand that clearly in your heart, so you're not just stuck with saying rewilding or conservation, for example, and just sort of letting the unconscious bias be the meaning. So I think being really clear about that's really important. And then when you are really clear about that, and you've just managed to have enough of an ear of a student or a policymaker or someone commissioning to get them on board with what you mean, and then we can talk about it and to understand it myself really clearly, and then perhaps I can shout about it from my platform or possibly whisper about it more, but anyway, or make about it.
Make and shout, I think that's a good...
But
whisper, I don't think is...
No, I don't agree.
Really?
My work is incredibly whispery and delicate. And do you know what I've been noticing? You know, nature's so red in tooth and claw with these, you know, baby birds are falling out of nests and things are becoming extinct and all these really difficult, honest things are happening, as well as the really beautiful things. But I think if I make with extreme delicacy, people sort of lean in and listen to what you're saying and look closer and step forward. And you know, those David Attenborough programmes where all the poor zebras are being crunched up by the crocodiles, people look away. So I think it's this sort of whispering so they lean in and sort of don't shove. I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong to shove the misery in people's faces, and it's really important too, but again with this sort of two sides to a coin thing, I think whispering and making about nature, I think it's a respect thing. If I make some blade of grass that might seem a little bit unimportant with incredible delicacy and put a tiny bit of calligraphy into the flick on the end of the leaf, people see the ordinary in a more extraordinary way and lean in to look, and then maybe look at nature with a bit more wonder and respect. And it's a bit of a buzzword now, isn't it? But that word awe, as in when you see the northern lights, which I've never bloody seen, and they've been everywhere, but I've never seen them yet, even being up in Yorkshire. That sort of awe factor, it does something. And I'm not saying my work could be anything like as grand as the northern lights, but sometimes something made with extreme patience and delicacy and repetition that makes people think, God, that took a long time, or wow, that's so delicate. It can sort of encourage a hint of that.
And I think it sounds almost like you're making things that you want, things that will encourage conversation and make conversation flow, as opposed to things that will shock people into silence.
Well, I think I'm sort of drawing them in, and then you can say, you know, like looking at insects, people aren't great about insects, but I think, I mean, they're as important as flowers. But I had a conversation with someone recently where they were saying, well, insects don't sell, so we must be careful about that, mustn't we? And it's true, people love the flower but are funny about the insect. So I'm always thinking, how can I whisper an insect's importance out there? Maybe it's a funny sort of challenge that I'm tussling with, but to say these things quietly so people lean in, I sort of love that. Maybe it's a bit naughty in a way, but
no, I think it's wonderful. You're finding your own language and your own way of connecting with people, and encouraging them to connect with your work,
and then to connect with, I think, what people take away in their heads from things. This is a bit more of a sort of growing up thing about what an installation is. That, you tend to think as a maker it's all about what you've made and what you think and what you say, when really it's all about what can other people take away and think their own thoughts about and enjoy or disagree with, or whatever it is. You want an installation to sort of go out pollinating people, don't you? That's what I want to happen. And if someone thinks I could make it better, or that's really positive too. It's just getting people's attention to then see the world a bit differently or freshly in some way.
You talk about
the environment a lot, and when we were talking before the start of the interview, you were talking about not wanting to wash things too much. I mean, what's your approach within your practice of, I guess, is it a sort of mindfulness, or how would you like to approach that?
I think these things are so difficult, aren't they? Because I won't waste water, so I won't wash up my dyes. I leave the pots all over the place like a dirty old, it's not a watercolour box, it's almost like a watercolour bath, you know, instead of a box of watercolours.
Yeah.
So I might be good in that way, and I might be on my bicycle most of the time, but I might also be using some extraordinary fumey solvent-based straw stiffener that is not great. And I think trying to have a sense of proportion, I think that's important. I love, you know, millinery has been in the past notorious for exotic birds meeting a bitter end to go on a hat or something, you know, all things that are so of their time, and you would never want to do that now. So I've turned that around for myself, where I might find a parakeet feather in the park and that's what I'll use. And I think, or I might use feathers for my hen. If you were going to have the clock of the most happy way to find a feather or the worst, you know, the feather for my own hen that moulted that I collected each year, that's the happiest, you know, whereas some special pheasant feather where you're not quite sure where it came from, you know, I'm not saying you don't, but I think it's being aware of these things.
Yeah.
And maybe we could be 70%.
Being aware enough that you can make a decision about it.
And what I found with this collecting feathers, there's something really wonderful about only having one, so you have to respect it. And then where you find it becomes part of the piece in a way, because Ruskin Park is such a stamping ground for finding the odd parakeet feather, whereas Peckham Rye has got nothing but crows, and actually I love crow feathers, but there's a whole crow colony there moulting, so I would go there for the crow feathers, and it sort of connects you to a sense of place that's a bit more of a bygone age of the feather domains. I was thinking about French wine. Isn't it lovely that you've got Ruskin as the parakeet domain, and then you've got Peckham Rye as the crow domain, and then I found some curlew feathers at Mersey
Everything
Island.
has its providence.
Yeah, and you sharing these ideas with people with an installation. For the Birds on the Edge project, besides the installation itself, I made a nature table, but really it's a kind of nature table of making. That had feathers from the hen, parakeet feathers, all sorts of elements. And it was really lovely to encourage the visitors who came to see how I find feathers and to think of going out and collecting feathers on their walks, and they'll have that wonderful memory connection with a particular landscape where you found something, in the way that when you beachcomb, it just makes a different element to being out walking, to notice the materials and the feathers. You know, who doesn't love a feather? They somehow are something that it's lovely to collect, that just fell naturally. You know, a lot of people don't even realise that birds molt. So that each year the feathers fall out, that's something you can feel wholly ethical about, and I like that.
No, that makes sense. And I guess there's, you know, when you find something and you choose it, and it's sort of a conscious decision to ascribe value to it, but value that's only in the eye of a beholder. And it's a kind of a, you know, so you are collecting these feathers, and then you kind of pass on that value that you've ascribed to it when someone decides to purchase your work. It's kind of a lovely sort of continuity.
I think purchasing the work, I mean, of course I need people to purchase the work, but I think sharing in the thinking as a way of thinking about enjoying nature in a different way or being a bit more sustainable, I think that whole way of thinking is so important. I'm not sure that people necessarily really love my work if they don't get a bit of that. I feel that's part of the...
They're maybe not fully connecting with it or getting all the goodness out of it that they could.
Well, I think you can sort of love the look of it but not quite hear the music. I don't know. It is important.
No, that makes sense. Do you want to talk about the work that you've been doing for Jaggedart?
So Jaggedart, they're a gallery that I've always admired ever since I sort of discovered them. They're in Marylebone, And what's really wonderful about the curator of jaggedart is she really cares about the voice of materials. It might not be her words, they may be more mine, but she sees the sort of poetry that materials have within them, and the work that she loves all has that voice. And the other thing that I really love about the gallery is she loves the conversations that happen mentally between different people's work. And you know, when you squeeze some lemon on some brambles, it doesn't have to bring out the flavour of it. So that slight sort of comparing two colours, comparing two mediums, comparing two ways of thinking about the same thing, it just adds a wonderful richness to the experience of making. So I'm so proud to be represented by her now, and it's just a really wonderful opportunity where she might be selling work, meeting interior designers, taking my work to special exhibitions. But the thing about her is she understands the poetry of the work as well, so I'm not having to leave that behind to have a gallery relationship.
What is work that you would like to make in the future, or commission that you would like to get?
Oh, I've got such a big daydream going on at the moment.
Yeah?
I'd like to research with some ecologists, people to do with nature. I think I'd like to do a bigger, deeper version of the Birds on the Edge North York Moors National Park model. I think I'd like to make some work that took that knowledge and understanding of some of the things that you can't see in nature, like maybe you can't see the pattern of bird migration or the trend of it, and maybe you can't see how many insects are really equalising the insects and the flowers. It's showing these invisible things and finding some sort of knowledge and making language to express the things that you can't quite see. And really, again, it's a bit like a bird building its nest. I don't know who the parents of the project will be. I'm not sure where I'm going to lay the eggs, but I can feel something kind of brewing that I'm going to pursue. That, you know, talking and reading about things is quite linear. So it comes out in a line like ticker tape, say, really, in the way you perceive your consciousness. But if you see an installation that sums all that up, it's a bit like when you play charades and you get a moment to do the whole thing as well as the individual elements. I think that's a really important voice for big ideas, that even if you're the most educated, sophisticated scientist in the world, you could still benefit from seeing a visual version of the whole thing as a sort of talking point about something.
Again, it's that element of communication. You're kind of wanting to summarise something
and give it
clarity.
Films have narration, books have illustration, and I think projects could have a sort of making element or a visual, touching, making element as well that runs alongside, you know, for people who know nothing and the people who know everything about it. There was one, I've just sort of started unpicking this idea a little bit and talking to a bird specialist. She was talking about the difficulty of measuring, say, offshore wind farms. How much do they disrupt a nesting habitat? And so how do you measure what the offshore wind farm might owe towards conservation to make things balance, and how do you present that to policymakers to get a fair deal? And these things are very dry, they're very linear, they're very unemotional, whereas she is the most emotionally passionate scientist combination that I've ever met. You know, sometimes the way we change policies and the way we do things can be rather dry and a bit sort of legal, and so away from the human benefits of being in nature or feeling a connection with or admiration for birds or a sense of awe. It can all be very, very separate. I'd sort of love to offer something that brought them together a little bit more in some way.
Yeah, the emotional can get things over the line sometimes.
And be a bit disrespected in a way as a voice. I've got no answers, but these are my thoughts about it.
Is there anything else that we haven't touched upon that you would like to share about your practice, or maybe about this space, because you've had this studio for a number of years now?
I've been here such a long time, and I think plants grow in their pots, don't they? Mm-hmm. So I think I've sort of grown in here.
You're a happy plant.
I am, and I've got a great big space. Again, coming back to money, I probably shouldn't have such a big space. I probably should be a little bit more pot bound. But
do you feel you say that because the work you make is smaller in scale?
Well, don't you think the smaller the work, the bigger the mess? That's my...
Wow.
I think there's something going on there.
So maybe you do need that big space.
I think I do. I think it's a difficult thing. I think managing feels like the new doing well. I've been saying that to myself for years, that just managing to be who I want to be creatively and have all sorts of projects on the go, that's really fantastic. And you mentioned in one of your questions, what could the government do? I think, I mean, everyone would immediately say funding, wouldn't they? And of course, that's true. But I think a sort of change in attitude. I was looking up the meaning of the word dogma. Mm-hmm. And everyone says that a mother's love to a tiny child is incredibly important, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And
formative.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And gives you nutrients for life, or certainly sometimes by taking away you see what the value is, don't you? And that's always a difficult thing to quantify. I think so many people want to be artists, want to be creative, have some sort of involvement in it, whether it's full-time with all the difficulties that has, or part-time as a more treasured sort of bit of their weekend or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's such a part of human wish and well-being, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think I would, even if everything can't be funded, I think to have some knowledge and respect of how important that is, like we're trying to do with nature, I think that will be incredibly helpful to have that cultural background to it, to place these fundings on. Because if you just say more money for the arts, without being really clear about how that works,
it's a shift in attitude, really.
Yes,
that's needed,
how
isn't
does
it?
one do that? Even a step towards that will be a wonderful thing. I'm sure a lot of people are doing it.
Yeah.
But I think that sort of respecting that creative parts of your life are very important.
I think that's something that I often sort of wrestle with, is this idea. I think there's been a lot of narrative around the arts and making, where it's, it's a nice to have, or it's
a soft option, maybe.
Yeah, or it's a privilege. It's something that you do. Like, aren't you lucky to be able to do that? But I feel it's so at the core of human existence. Humans have been making art, as far back as we can. That's the first sort of evidence of humans having been somewhere is often some form of making. It's whether it's tools or ceramic or, paintings on walls. It's what we've always done, and it's part of our way of expressing ourselves, of leaving something of ourselves behind, and also a way of processing emotions. And all of that seems incredibly important to me, but I'm not sure that that's always what we hear from bigger voices.
So, that the only reason we know about the past is from these things, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
I would like human creativity to be a bit more of a dogma than it is.
Yeah.
And, even if I could just inch towards that in the right sort of way, I suppose you need people telling people off, but you also, I think I'd like to inspire people to think a bit more deeply about it. I lost my thread there.
No, is that something that you still like to whisper about, or would you rather shout about that bit?
I'm really debating how to get people's attention in the right way.
Okay. Well, maybe I guess this video can be the start. I think you said something just before we started recording, you and I were brainstorming different topics that we wanted to bring up. And you said sometimes you do something and then you realise it was the rehearsal for something bigger. So maybe you'll look back on this interview and then maybe I'll have started something, a thought process, something you'll pursue that will sort of maybe put you on the path to, you know, finding out how you're going to communicate that. And
I think also what's great about these things is that you find a tribe of people who are interested. I think a choir, that's a nice metaphor, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm not going to shout, but finding a choir where no one's making their voice go squawky, there's still elegance there. I think that's a good metaphor for how to get some attention.
And you amplify the message by the strength
in
in numbers.
But still, because I think screeching turns people off, you see.
That's true.
And it's a delicate balance, isn't it? I'm not saying you don't need that, but I don't think that's my forte, you see. So perhaps I need to find the person who shouts and I'll accompany them with making.
I think that's actually a good lesson for me. I tend to be very shouty about my opinions, so maybe I need a little bit of... I don't think I'm quite capable of whispering, but certainly the choir idea, you know, and I guess that's in a way what I'm doing with these with this channel is I'm adding voices together week after week, and we're building up. So I guess making a choir of makers.
I think that's a really exciting thought. It's really positive, actually.
Thank you. I guess, well, maybe we'll end on that note because it's quite a positive one.
That's the insect just on cue.
But thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. I feel like we could have, you know, keep going and have more of these conversations, but hopefully it can be a sort of starting point for more to come.
I think having the chance to express your ideas is quite an important thing in forming them, actually.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think on my own. I sometimes have to chat myself better, chat myself stronger, whisper myself stronger. There you go.
Yeah. Well, that's, no, I think that makes sense. Yeah, and it echoes with, you know, resonates with what I'm trying to do. So that's really wonderful. Thank you again for today and for having me here. It means a lot.
My pleasure.
I've included links to Design Nation, the British Hat Guild, and the Artworkers Guild down below. And I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you a little bit more about the Artworkers Guild, which Bridget and I are both members of. It's an educational charity with over 400 members from across 60 plus visual arts and crafts disciplines. We've just started a fundraising campaign to support and increase the outreach work we already do with school children, educators, refugees, early career makers, etc. I hope you'll agree it's for a good cause. Just to be transparent, the Guild has an event hire business that covers the maintenance of our building, and annual membership fees cover all the talks and exhibitions for our membership. Therefore, the Guild is a healthy, self-sustaining organisation, and the money raised through this fundraising campaign will go entirely towards the outreach programme. And the more money we raise, the more ambitious we can be with that good work. I've included the link to our Just Giving page down below, and thank you in advance for any donations you can spare. Thank you for watching. It means a lot, especially as at the moment this channel is entirely self-funded. So please spread the word and subscribe. See you next week.
Hi Bridget, thank you so much. Oh no, it's starting. Okay, we're still good. All right.